Willkommen, bienvenue. Welcome one and all to another live stream. I am overjoyed to tell you that in the virtual studio we have Hamish McLay of Search Convey and of course Valerie Bennett, Home Information Searchers. Now, we often come together to celebrate all things IPSA, the Independent Personal Search Association, of which Hamish is the current chairman. And today's topic is no different. You'll have heard this before in different guises. It's about people, not data, which are at the core of IPSA searches. And without further ado, I'm going to mercilessly throw Hamish straight under the bus.
Well, it's an afternoon and a cool one in many places today. And it's rather fortunate that we've had this transformation in the way in which we carry out our local searches, local authority searches, in that very often we don't actually need to dive into our cars and drive the distance to go in to look at their records. There has been a transformation over the years. And what's very, very interesting, I do like to look at things historically because that is how relationships have developed between people, particularly between the members of IPSA and the local councils that they have become sort of masters of. And in many, many cases, our sort of members have actually been working with that council longer than the people in the offices. So they can often tell people in the offices, particularly the newer ones, of ways to get the information. And I can only observe, because I'm a bit of a newcomer, really. I've only been operating for 20 years in the business. But what we have today to actually sort of join us, Val wasn't able to get to us last week because of a last-minute emergency. However, we managed to carry on. So we started speaking about the history, mainly because it's that historical relationship, the people involved in the historical relationship that actually brings searches to life and actually do the best for the people that we're trying to work for, which ultimately are the buyers and the sellers. We want them to be able to move as easily as we can. And that's what we try and do with the searches we cover. But historically, Val's family were pioneers in this particular sort of industry. And I dread to think what it was like back in the 80s. Somehow, though, I bet it was a hell of a lot easier.
Well, do you think the 80s were easier? Valerie, were the 80s easier? As far as I remember them, and I remember very clearly, there was less information, less people looking for it, and it was more closed doors.
It was. I was only thinking about this a couple of days ago. Is it easier or harder now or then? And I would say in a lot of ways it's an awful lot easier now, without a doubt. Because the information for probably 80% of the searches and everything we do is there on the screen in front of you every day. As long as it's working, you can access it. Whereas back then it was very much make those phone calls and get those appointments. That you didn't, the council, there was no rules to play by back then. There was no IPSA, there was no COPSO. There was my dad back in the mid-80s. It all sort of came about because the council, even 40 years ago, they had 3-month, 6-month delays in getting the searches back to the solicitors. And that's how it kind of came about. And my dad actually went for an interview at Manchester Town Hall where they were doing a jobs fair. And ICC and Jordan's were there promoting the fact that they wanted to try and get people interested in doing the searches. And my sort of first memories are of my dad driving wherever in the country that he was asked to go to with his imperial typewriter on the passenger seat with his carbon paper, and he would go to the council and he would get his information and he would put the paper in and he would type up the report and it would be in the post box, because if he was in Wrexham or wherever, and then for the time to travel back home to then type it up, he would miss the end of the day's post. So it was always, and I'm sure that typewriter is still hanging around somewhere even now. So this was obviously just before kind of word processors, which was the next step, which was like, wow, we got word processor and floppy disks. That was like all our files were stored on floppy disks, all our reports. And to teach my dad then how to use a word processor from going from a typewriter was a big move. Then it was fax machines. So our work came in each day via fax machine. So you would come back, or I wasn't working for them then, it was just my dad and my mum, because my mum was a legal secretary. And once the solicitors that she worked for knew what my dad was doing, they then were like, oh, this is good. Do you think he could do searches for us? And that kind of, for my family, is how it all started. So then my mum gave up doing her soliciting work, so as to speak. And she then started doing the searches as well. And it was very much, I say, that you would make the appointments and you would go to the council offices and you would go, particularly sort of in Manchester, when we had free reign, Manchester Town Hall, which is just still in the process of being refurbished as a listed building, because it's costing, I think it's about 400 million or something, or maybe I'm wrong with that. But we would wander around to all the different levels, all the different floors, get into all the different departments. I'd have my daughter in tow with me, because we didn't palm the children off to after school clubs and holiday clubs. She came with me, so she knew OS sheets by the time she was 8 years old. You know, she was in those drawers. So yeah, and I mean, obviously back then it was different, that you would look at the OS sheets, you would have to find your addresses, find where it was on there, get your reference numbers, dig them out, you know. But it was hands-on. You got the information that you wanted and you did it. And then you had other councils like who were horrible, like Trafford, for instance. That I remember sitting there with the likes of Steve Davis, Christian. We would all sit in the reception at 2 o'clock, waiting for them to bring down our information. And one day I phoned them up. It was about 3:30, because we could only go between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock. That was the cut-off time. I phoned them up to say, look, I'm caught in traffic and I might be 5 minutes late. Oh, well, if you're late, then don't bother coming, you know. And I'm like, no, I've got to be there. I need to be there. And I arrived literally 2 minutes late and got to the reception to be told, no, everything's been destroyed. You'll have to make a new appointment and come back another day, because we only keep the information till 4 o'clock for you. And you kind of go like, you know, there was a lot of unnecessary things went on. I remember my dad going to one of the Welsh councils, can't remember which one it was, and they put a line across the floor in the land charges office that as a search agent, you were not allowed to cross that line, bizarrely, and they would only speak Welsh to you. So you had to try and interpret what they were saying, because they refused to speak English and they wouldn't allow you. I'm not sure if it might have been Anglesey or Wrexham or Flint. I can't remember which one. I never went myself. But yeah, so that they were like sort of really weird sort of things that did go on. I say, and that was before IPSA and before COPSO and before anything like that, when the councils could do what they want and they could stop us. And they used to kind of hold that flag and wave the power of like, we're in charge and we'll say when you're coming, because they were frightened of us.
Why were they frightened of you?
Because we were taking their work and taking their jobs, and that's what they were worried about. But then you ended up sort of that you had people like Jackie, like David Kay, like Mahesh, who were those people in those council offices that we went to see. And they kind of cottoned on and went, oh, do you know what? This is an idea. Instead of me being this side of the counter, I'm going to be the other side of the counter. So when the opportunity arose, they then left, quit whatever they chose to do, and said, no, do you know what? If you all can do this, then do you know what? I can do this as well as you all can do it, because I know what's going on my side of the counter. So that was when we welcomed, I say, obviously, like Jackie. So she's the other side of the hills. I'm the Lancashire side. She's the Yorkshire side. So yeah, it was a bizarre time. I do remember. I went to 8 councils one day, from a day 9 till 5. I actually went to 8 councils. That was the most I ever visited in one day, which I think was quite an achievement to do. And the most searches I ever did in one day, actually physically going to councils, was 100, which was like, I mean, and most of them were a Manchester one where we just had to look at, look at all the sheets and everything else. But I actually did physically do 100 searches, which I was quite proud of. I never went to all the council offices. I think there's still some I ended up missing out. But there was one chap I know who, I can see him, but I can't remember his name. And he was so proud in the 90s or early 2000s because he actually went to every single council offices. The real feather in his cap for him. Sorry, go on, guys, say something to me.
But it was a time. It was a time, wasn't it? It was a different time. Hamish, you have to admit that although the march of technology has been there still are a different form of hindrance. The rise of the factory conveyancer who will do the bare minimum and give you barely enough, and which has made you guys, I think, all the more valuable because you guys depend on the relationship build, which means that people will go the extra mile for you and you're more likely to get the information quicker.
I think we can probably see why. And I mean, that was just fabulous. I mean, it's absolutely great having Val there. I knew some of what went on previously, but I didn't realise basically the turmoil that some of those earlier researchers had to go through just to get the information. And what became a proven fact, instead of taking the jobs away, unfortunately, what actually has actually impacted on councils, it really is the corporates. It's really the factory conveyancers that have actually sort of done that because of the pressure, because they're wanting hundreds of searches rather than the 1 or 2 searches that we ourselves, I say 1 or 2. I mean, Val, of course, explained a large number which she covered during one particular sort of day. However, what it is that working that relationship. And unfortunately, if you're sat in an office in Liverpool and you're actually speaking to a council, or you have to communicate with the council in Kent, and all you've ever done is sat at your office up there in Liverpool, you really don't know much about that particular locality. You don't have the relationship. And it's good that, I mean, obviously, relationships between obviously people who are trying to obtain the information and the councils, they have to be good at it. They have to actually sort of work at it, but it isn't quite the same. And particularly when you're looking at the numbers, because it's large numbers sort of each time, which does make it difficult for us in some respects, because we have to cope with councils with large numbers of requirements coming from the factory conveyancing side of things, or the corporate sort of side of things, which means it does actually slow us down. But the main impact as well, and I mean, Val hasn't actually touched on that, but the great thing is, having worked the relationships, we know should a query come up and should the solicitor want us to get some further information, we can actually sort of go back to the council and sort of say to the council, right, we've got this challenge, what do you think? And very often we can actually put errors correct that the councils have made, and in fact if we can't actually sort of do that, they will give us the fuller detail because we spoke to the right person about it. And that's down to people being able to carry out the professional way of doing it, is to actually know exactly what you're talking about. We seem to have lost at the moment, Gareth, but not to worry.
I'm still here. I apologize. It's my video as well. But I would say, Valerie, can you tell me a little bit more about how the experience now has changed for personal search associates like yourself?
Yeah, I do think it's very handy when a lot more information is online for us, like what HMLR have done, and what the councils are trying to do. There are still some councils for me, and I'm sure for a lot of other people, where we do still have to go to the council, which I do still enjoy doing because I go to a couple. Most weeks I actually go, and I'm still looking at plotting sheets because it's some of my councils are a bit in the olden days still, and they haven't got everything online, or they've just got things scanned and you still have to access them. But then again, and then you've also got a new generation of staff now that work at the councils. I don't think there's anybody now from my back in the day who was there. So some of the councils, I kind of, I can hopefully, sometimes I might have to guide them into telling me what I need to know. And I don't think it's always about building relationships up, as in close relationships like we used to do when we used to see people face to face daily or weekly. It's all about how, sometimes for me, sometimes it's about how you ask the questions. It's having the manners and the respect to always know that you've got to be respectful to people and not just assume that, well, I know everything, I've done this and I demand and I want this, that and the other. There was an incident yesterday where I'd been given information that something may or may not be affected by a TPO. And I was like, oh, right, okay, what am I going to do? Quick email to planning. I didn't ask for, all I want to know is this house affected by a TPO, because land charges weren't sure about it. I then get a copy of the TPO order plus full maps showing where all these TPOs are. Now I was like, wow, that's amazing. What a wonderful response that is, because something like that back in the day, you'd have to pay for that information. If I said, can I have a copy of a TPO? It'd be, yeah, give us £25, send us a check. That's also a big difference, because also back in the day, you made me laugh, Hamish, because you mentioned last week about paying for land charges. And I think you started off saying that originally there were £6. Well, when I started, they were £1.20. That was how much we paid. We had to pay land charges for every search that we did. It was £1.20. Then it went to £6, then £11, then £22. Those are the figures I recall anyway. But again, then everything was paid by check. Anything you wanted, you had to pay by check. There was no bank cards. There was no backs payments. So even that actually is easier now than it used to be, because you went through hundreds of checks, writing all these land charges checks out. I'd forgotten about that until just at that minute. But it was what I would call it the good old days. There were more good people, more good councils than there were bad ones, and it was a full learning curve that then more people came into it, and we just helped to build this cottage industry that it was back then, and it was there to help the solicitors, it was to help the purchasers. That's what we were there for primarily. It was, it was there to help people. It wasn't to do with the cost, it was the speed, it was the turnaround time. And, we met great people. I used to hate having to find somewhere to park all the time, at least
yeah.
It was a really good learning curve, because I didn't know anything about what I was going into. I wasn't like Jackie or Mahesh or David. I didn't know what I was going into. It really was a learning curve, And yeah, 30, 40 years later, I'm still not quite 40 years, but I'm still here and I'm still doing it. And what I notice more now is that I do now get a lot more phone calls randomly from people who somewhere get my name that go, we believe you're the person that can help us, and having that experience, and I'm more than happy to help any, whether it's agents or solicitors. If somebody has a question, then ask the question. If I know, I can, I'll help. A bit like Jackie, ask us the questions, because we don't always know what we know until somebody asks us, But a lot more solicitors are now kind of approaching and going, can you do this? As a local agent, we're using X, Y, and Z, these big companies, but they say it's going to take this long to get it back. We believe you can get it back quicker. Yeah, of course I can. And if I can, I get it back for them. But they're more and more discovering that it is the IPSA agents, it is these smaller companies that do have that local knowledge that are actually more beneficial to them than the corporates that are all on the phones and they're all just churning the searches out, who don't know when the search is really going to be back to them.
Wow.
I'll stop. Sorry, Hamish.
No, it's all right. But Hamish, is there not a call for people to try and find a way forward through this?
I mean, I think there is, and one of the great things is over time, because of the relationship, and as Val said, it's in some respects it's not as important now because much of the information you can just actually get it online. It's not that person-to-person communication, but it's having had the relationship in the past that we now know where to look, and it's a positive way forward. In fact, we don't see an obstruction. Sadly, some councils, and it's not the staff that we're working with that create the challenges, it's basically the bosses. Councils are money strapped at the moment. They're reducing staff, they're unifying, they're putting different councils together. I mean, some of the stuff that Val and I's worked on, it's great asking Val because we get this story of becoming unitary, and Val says, "Oh, well, I can cover two of the council areas because I've done those over the years, but I don't know the third one." But somebody in IPSA will actually do that third one. And that's the great sort of thing about it. So we do have a positive construct. We have a positive way forward. We have a way of helping people. And as Val said, we can intervene on occasions because if you're looking at, and it's going to be the same, isn't it? If you've got a massive great queue, you've got to wait until somebody gets through that. Because we aren't working with massive great numbers all the time, because if somebody wants a search in Manchester, basically we're working on Manchester. We can sort Manchester out. Whereas of course these bigger people sat at their desks, they're doing Manchester, they're doing Lincolnshire, they're doing Kent, they're doing all of these different sort of, but they're a big pile, it's a big stack. Whereas we can actually sort of go through. And as Val intimated sort of there, I mean, one of the great things like her father was able to do on the typewriter, they used post. I mean, we've done this in the past, particularly when we were covering London. We don't cover London these days, but when we covered London, we could actually, on the transfer, on the train coming back and on the coach coming back, we could get into our laptops and we could get the search off to somebody before we got to the office. And that's because you're doing it personally. That's what Val said. We don't need to get. We don't have to go to as many council areas now, but some people do like to get out of the house or out of the office and actually travel around the countryside. It's not a bad thing to be able to do that.
That reminded me, Hamish, just of a little story. Stockport Council. John Rimmer, this guy was called. Maybe he's alive. I have no idea. And he ruled Stockport with a bit of an iron rod. But my dad, so even back then, my dad knew how important it was to build relationships. So my dad was the one that he would get there for 1 o'clock or whatever. The appointments were only ever 2 o'clock on an afternoon. And he would get there 1 o'clock, and him and John Rimmer, they'd go to the pub, they'd go and have a game of snooker. He knew how to get on the right side of John Rimmer so that he was always in good stead to get his searches done, because he knew that Stockport was going to be a key one for us. So everybody else used to call him left, right, and centre, for being the sort of the hard man that he was. But my dad was like, no, it's fine. John's fine, no problem. We go to the snooker hall, we have a pint, because that was what it was back then. And you found a way to kind of build relationships with the land charges officers. That's what you did. But I say it's not quite as easy to do that anymore. I don't think anybody's allowed to drink at lunchtime, are they? With the, with new rules or whatever it is.
Well, so, look, I just want to quickly thank Claire Terrell, who's sent us a quick message saying that she's watching us with a big smiley face. Thank you very much for that. It only remains for me to thank Hamish McLay of Search Convey, whose idea this channel is, and of course Valerie Bennett. Thank you so much. A little bit of a trip down memory lane, but I think it's worthwhile to understand where the benefits of what's happened now are, and perhaps where the iniquities are. Until next time, try and keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and just think independence is the way towards property, finding information about that is actually relevant to what you are rather than bog standard. Find out that extra bit more, make better decisions. Until next time, goodbye.
Right now.